The wedding invitation arrived on a rainy Thursday morning inside a thick ivory envelope stamped with gold lettering so expensive it almost looked arrogant. Ethan Brooks stared at it in silence while standing beside the tiny kitchen counter of his modest apartment in Seattle. The sound of cartoon music echoing softly from the living room, where his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat wrapped in a blanket eating cereal before school. For several seconds, he did not touch the envelope. He simply looked at the name written across the front in elegant cursive handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. Olivia Carter, even after 7 years. The sight of her name still carried the strange power to stop his breathing for a moment. Sophie noticed the change in his face almost immediately. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "are you okay?" Ethan slowly picked up the envelope and forced a calm smile. "Yeah, sweetheart." But his voice sounded distant. Careful, like a man stepping near an old wound he thought had already healed. He opened the envelope and unfolded the invitation with steady hands. "Olivia Carter and Nathaniel Vaughn request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration at the Grand Meridian Coastal Resort in Monterey, California." Ethan read the sentence twice. Then he noticed the handwritten note beneath the printed text. "Hope life has treated you kindly, Ethan. It would mean so much to see you there after all these years. Olivia." The corners of Ethan's mouth almost moved into a smile, but not because the message touched him. Because he knew Olivia too well. She had never done anything halfway. Not love, not ambition, not cruelty, especially not cruelty disguised as elegance, across the country. Olivia sat in a luxury bridal suite overlooking the Pacific Ocean, while her bridesmaids laughed around her champagne glasses glowing beneath golden afternoon sunlight. "Do you really think he'll come?" one of them asked, while flipping through the guest list. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Oh, he'll come," she said confidently. "Men like Ethan always come back when they realize what they lost." Another bridesmaid smirked. "Didn't he end up broke or something?" Olivia pretended to hesitate before answering. "Last I heard, single dad, working random jobs, barely surviving." She said it casually, but there was something beneath her smile that didn't look like happiness. It looked personal, old, bitter. 7 years earlier, Ethan Brooks had once been the only man Olivia believed she would ever marry. Back then, they were young, exhausted, and desperately trying to survive in San Francisco, while Olivia fought through law school and Ethan worked endless shifts repairing elevators, driving deliveries, and doing construction work just to keep them afloat. Ethan used to leave handwritten notes in her textbooks before exams. He used to stay awake waiting for her after midnight classes with cheap takeout food because he knew she forgot to eat when stressed. He sold his late father's watch to pay 1 semester of her tuition when she secretly couldn't afford it. Olivia never knew. Ethan never told her. But love became difficult once ambition entered the room. Olivia wanted more than survival, more than cramped apartments and overdue bills, and watching Ethan fall asleep sitting upright at the kitchen table because he worked 3 jobs in one day. She wanted luxury, stability, power. And when Nathaniel Vaughn appeared, a polished real estate developer with tailored suits, expensive restaurants, and promises of a glamorous future. Olivia began looking at Ethan differently, less like a partner, more like a weight tied to her ankle. The night she left him still lived inside Ethan's memory with painful clarity, rain hitting the windows. Olivia standing beside packed luggage near the apartment door. "Love doesn't pay bills, Ethan," she had whispered coldly. "I can't spend my life drowning beside you." Ethan remembered not fighting her, not yelling, not begging. He only nodded once and stepped aside so she could leave with dignity, because loving someone deeply sometimes meant letting them go without watching them hate you first. Olivia mistook his silence for weakness. Most people did. The week of the wedding arrived quickly. The Grand Meridian Coastal Resort looked like something designed for royalty. White marble staircases overlooked the ocean cliffs. Crystal chandeliers glowed through towering glass walls, while luxury cars lined the circular entrance. Politicians, investors, celebrities, and wealthy executives filled the resort with expensive perfume and louder egos. Olivia moved through the chaos in a custom designer gown while photographers followed her constantly. Everyone admired her. Everyone envied her. And yet every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the guest entrance. Waiting. Curious. "You really want this Ethan guy here that badly?" Nathaniel asked while adjusting his tuxedo cufflinks inside the private lounge. Olivia smiled lightly. "I just think closure is healthy." Nathaniel laughed. "Closure? I spent years with him," she replied. "It'll be satisfying seeing how differently our lives turned out." Nathaniel kissed her forehead distractedly. "Well, if your sad little ex actually shows up, I hope he enjoys the view from the back tables." Olivia smiled again, because that part had already been arranged. Table 37, near the catering hallway beside the temporary kitchen entrance where servers carried trays back and forth all evening. Every seat near Ethan's table belonged to distant acquaintances, divorced relatives, and people Nathaniel considered socially unimportant. Olivia personally approved the arrangement. She imagined Ethan sitting there alone in an old suit, quietly humiliated while watching her dance beneath chandeliers beside a billionaire husband. The image gave her a cruel sense of satisfaction she tried not to examine too closely. By sunset, the wedding venue shimmered like a scene from a movie. Live string musicians played near fountains covered in white roses, while hundreds of guests gathered beneath glowing lanterns beside the ocean cliffs. Conversations flowed effortlessly around investment portfolios, luxury travel, and elite social gossip. Then someone near the entrance frowned. A black SUV rolled slowly toward the front gates. Then another behind it. Then another. 3 identical matte black Escalades stopped in perfect sequence outside the main entrance. Conversations began fading. Valets exchanged confused looks. "Who the hell is that?" someone whispered. The first vehicle door opened. 2 men stepped out wearing dark, tailored suits and discreet earpieces. Not flashy security, professional security. The kind that moved with military precision instead of intimidation. Their eyes scanned rooftops, exits, guests, movement patterns. Another man exited the second SUV, then another. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even wealthy people recognized real power when they saw it. Nathaniel frowned from across the terrace. "Did we invite a senator or something?" One of the bridesmaids whispered nervously. "Maybe a celebrity?" Olivia turned toward the entrance casually at first. Then her expression froze. Ethan Brooks stepped out of the final SUV holding his daughter's hand. Silence moved through the crowd almost physically. Ethan wore a perfectly tailored black suit with no visible logos, no flashy jewelry, no attempt to impress anyone. But nothing about him resembled the exhausted, struggling man Olivia remembered. He moved calmly, controlled, quiet in the way dangerous storms are quiet before impact. Sophie walked beside him in a soft cream-colored dress. Her small hand wrapped comfortably around his fingers, while her eyes widened at the massive resort lights. Ethan paused briefly beside the vehicles while one bodyguard leaned close and murmured something. Ethan nodded once. The man stepped back immediately. Olivia felt something cold slide through her chest. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't anger. It was uncertainty. For the first time in years. She could not read Ethan Brooks. Guests began whispering everywhere. "Who is he? Why does he have security? Wait, isn't that Olivia's ex?" "No way." Nathaniel forced a laugh beside her. "Okay, that's dramatic." But his voice lacked confidence. Ethan and Sophie began walking toward the entrance together while conversations parted around them naturally. Not because Ethan demanded attention, because he never looked around searching for approval. That confidence unsettled people more than arrogance ever could. Sophie looked up at him softly. "Daddy, why is everyone staring at us?" Ethan glanced down with the faintest smile. because sometimes people confuse silence with weakness. Olivia's stomach tightened unexpectedly, hearing his voice again after all these years. Calm, deep, unshaken. Not the voice of a broken man. Several old college friends immediately recognized Ethan and exchanged amused looks. Holy hell, one man muttered. He actually came. Another woman laughed quietly. I heard he was barely making rent somewhere. Maybe the security guys are Uber drivers, someone joked. A few people chuckled. Ethan heard all of it. He simply kept walking. That somehow made the mockery feel smaller instead of larger. Olivia forced herself forward with practiced elegance. Ethan, she said smoothly as he approached. You made it. Ethan looked at her for several seconds before answering. Congratulations, Olivia. No bitterness, no jealousy. Somehow that disappointed her. She had expected emotion, regret, pain, anything that proved she still mattered enough to wound him. Instead, he stood before her like a man who had survived something much harder than heartbreak. Olivia looked toward Sophie. And this must be your daughter. Sophie smiled politely. Hi. She's beautiful, Olivia said automatically. Ethan nodded once. She's the best thing in my life. Something inside Olivia twisted painfully hearing that sentence because years ago Ethan once said those exact words about her. Nathaniel stepped forward confidently and extended his hand. Nathaniel Vaughn. Ethan shook it politely. Nathaniel immediately noticed the calluses on Ethan's hands. Not soft executive hands. Hands built through work and hardship. Yet the expensive watch beneath Ethan's sleeve probably cost more than Nathaniel's car. Nathaniel smiled carefully. Interesting entrance, Ethan answered calmly. Long drive. Nathaniel laughed louder than necessary. Well, we're glad you could join us. Olivia said you two go way back. Ethan looked briefly toward the ocean behind them. Feels like another lifetime. Before Olivia could respond, the resort manager suddenly hurried toward Ethan with visible anxiety. Mr. Brooks, he said respectfully, we didn't realize you'd be arriving personally. If you'd prefer the private suite, Ethan interrupted gently. Table 37 is fine. The manager blinked in confusion. Sir, are you certain? Nathaniel and Olivia exchanged a quick glance. Ethan's expression never changed. Completely. The manager lowered his voice immediately. Of course, sir. Then he walked away, looking nervous. Olivia felt another wave of discomfort. Nathaniel noticed it too. You know the manager, he asked casually. Ethan answered. We've met before, but he offered nothing else. That silence became increasingly terrifying because every unanswered question made Ethan seem larger than the room itself. As dinner began, whispers spread through the ballroom like fire. Some guests claimed Ethan owned private military companies overseas. Others insisted he worked government intelligence contracts. One investor quietly approached Nathaniel near the bar. You know who your fiancé invited tonight? He asked carefully. Nathaniel smirked dismissively. An old boyfriend. The investor stared at him. That man's company handles executive protection for half the CEOs in Silicon Valley. Nathaniel's smile faded slowly. What company? Brooks Strategic International. Nathaniel frowned. Never heard of it. The investor gave a nervous laugh. That's the point. Across the ballroom, Ethan sat beside Sophie near the back tables exactly where Olivia intended him to be humiliated. Except somehow the entire room kept looking toward him anyway. Sophie quietly ate dessert while watching dancers beneath the chandeliers. Daddy, she whispered. Are we important? Ethan looked at her warmly. No more important than anyone else. Then why do those men follow you? Ethan glanced briefly toward the bodyguards, stationed discreetly around the ballroom perimeter. Because sometimes protecting peace requires preparation. Sophie thought carefully about that answer before nodding. Nearby guests pretended not to listen while hanging on to every word. Olivia watched Ethan constantly throughout the evening, despite trying not to. The worst part wasn't his wealth. It wasn't the security or mystery or whispered rumors. It was his composure. Ethan should have looked broken sitting at the back of her wedding watching her marry another man. Instead, he looked like someone who had already conquered much darker things than humiliation. And for the first time since mailing the invitation, Olivia began wondering whether inviting Ethan Brooks had been the biggest mistake of her life. The music inside the ballroom grew softer as dinner service continued, but the tension surrounding Ethan Brooks only deepened with every passing minute. Guests tried pretending they were focused on speeches, champagne, and ocean views, yet their attention kept drifting back toward the quiet man seated near the rear of the hall beside his daughter. Olivia noticed it constantly. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle change in atmosphere whenever Ethan stood, spoke, or even smiled faintly at Sophie. It frustrated her more than she expected because the entire purpose of inviting him had been simple. She wanted to feel superior. She wanted closure wrapped in humiliation. She wanted Ethan Brooks to walk into her perfect world and realize how far behind he had fallen. Instead, something far more unsettling was happening. The room respected him without understanding why. And Olivia hated how much that uncertainty was beginning to affect her. Across the ballroom, Sophie swung her legs gently beneath the table while staring at the enormous chandelier above them. "It looks like a castle," she whispered. Ethan glanced upward briefly before smiling. "You know what castles are missing?" Sophie looked curious. "What?" "Good pancakes." Sophie burst into laughter loud enough to make nearby guests glance over. Ethan laughed softly with her, and for the first time that night, Olivia saw something she did not expect to feel jealous of. Peace. Real peace. Not performance. Not status. Not expensive happiness carefully arranged for photographs. Ethan looked genuinely calm, sitting beside his daughter in a way Nathaniel never looked beside her. Nathaniel always looked like a man guarding his own image. Ethan looked like a man who had already survived losing everything except what truly mattered. Olivia quickly looked away, irritated by the thought. One of Nathaniel's business associates approached Ethan's table, cautiously holding a whiskey glass. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Ethan nodded politely. Sophie continued coloring quietly on the back of a folded dinner menu while the man leaned closer. "I heard your company handled evacuation security during the Singapore incident last year." Ethan calmly sipped water. "Partially." The businessman blinked. "Partially. You saved 6 executives from a hostage situation." Ethan shrugged slightly. "My team did their job." The businessman studied him carefully. "You don't really talk like a billionaire." Sophie suddenly looked up innocently. "Daddy says people who need everyone to know they're powerful usually aren't." The businessman laughed awkwardly. Ethan gave Sophie a patient look. "Sweetheart." "Sorry," she whispered with a grin. But the businessman looked more fascinated than offended. Nearby guests listened closely while pretending not to. Olivia watched from across the room beside Nathaniel's table, her stomach tightening again. Every conversation around Ethan somehow made him more mysterious instead of more understandable. That frightened her because Ethan used to be the easiest person in the world to read. Years ago, his emotions lived openly in his eyes. Love, exhaustion, hope, hurt. Olivia always knew exactly how he felt because Ethan never played games. But the man sitting in her wedding ballroom tonight felt completely different. Controlled, guarded, not cold, just unreachable. Nathaniel noticed her staring again. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Olivia forced a smile. "Of course." Nathaniel glanced toward Ethan. "He's putting on a good act." "What do you mean?" "Come on, Liv. Guys like him always want to prove something after they fail." Olivia nodded automatically, but deep inside she no longer believed that explanation. Ethan did not look like a man trying to prove anything. If anything, he looked like someone trying to stay invisible despite everyone staring at him. That difference bothered her deeply. Later in the evening, guests moved toward the outdoor terrace where ocean wind drifted through hanging lights and soft jazz music floated above the cliffs. Sophie stood near the railing, watching waves crash against the rocks below, while Ethan rested one hand gently on her shoulder. Olivia found herself walking toward them before realizing she had even made the decision. Sophie noticed her first. "Your dress is really pretty," Sophie said sincerely. Olivia smiled softly despite herself. "Thank you." Sophie tilted her head curiously. "Daddy said you used to hate fancy dresses." Ethan gave a quiet sigh under his breath. Olivia stared at him. "You told her about me?" Ethan looked toward the ocean instead of her. "Not much." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "He said you used to wear his hoodies and steal fries off his plate." Olivia felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Tiny memories she had forgotten returned all at once. Sitting beside Ethan on apartment floors eating cheap takeout because they couldn't afford furniture yet. Falling asleep wearing his oversized hoodies while studying for exams. Laughing over burnt pancakes at 2 in the morning after Ethan finished late shifts. Back then, they had nothing except each other. And somehow they had still been happier than most wealthy couples Olivia knew now. "Sophie," Ethan said gently, "why don't you go see the dessert table?" Sophie's eyes widened immediately. "Can I really? 1 cupcake?" 2. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sophie grinned. "Worth trying." She ran off toward the ballroom while Ethan watched carefully until she disappeared safely inside. Olivia folded her arms slowly. "She's adorable." Ethan nodded. "She saved my life." Olivia looked at him quietly for several seconds. "You seem different." Ethan smiled faintly. "People usually become different after 7 years. That's not what I mean." He finally looked at her directly then, and the calmness in his eyes unsettled her even more than anger would have. "You expected me to hate you," he said softly. Olivia froze because he was right. Ethan continued before she could respond. "You expected me to walk in here bitter and broken so you could feel better about leaving." Olivia looked away immediately. "That's not fair." Ethan's expression remained gentle, almost tired. "Isn't it?" She opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came, because somewhere deep down she knew exactly why she sent the invitation. Ethan leaned slightly against the railing while ocean wind moved through his dark hair. "You know the strange part," he said quietly. "I was never angry that you left." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "How could you not be?" Ethan gave a small, humorless smile. "Because I knew what loving me looked like back then." Flashbacks crashed through Olivia's mind without warning. Ethan coming home covered in dust after construction shifts. Ethan falling asleep in hospital chairs while waiting for her during panic attacks before exams. Ethan secretly skipping meals so she could afford textbooks. Ethan smiling through exhaustion because he never wanted her to feel guilty for dreaming bigger than their situation. Olivia suddenly remembered one night in particular. She had broken down crying over a tuition bill she couldn't pay. The next morning, Ethan somehow handed her an envelope containing the exact amount she needed. When she asked where the money came from, he lied and claimed he got overtime bonuses from work. Years later, she learned he had sold his father's vintage motorcycle, the last thing his father left him before dying. Olivia swallowed hard. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Ethan looked confused. "Tell you what?" "How much you were sacrificing." Ethan stared toward the ocean again. "Because love isn't supposed to feel like debt." The sentence hit Olivia harder than any accusation could have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Music drifted faintly from inside while distant laughter echoed across the terrace. But suddenly the glamorous wedding around them felt strangely far away. Olivia studied Ethan's face carefully beneath the soft lights. He looked older now, stronger. There were faint scars near his jaw she did not remember. His shoulders carried a heaviness that came from surviving difficult things silently. But despite all that, there was still kindness in him. That was what truly shattered her expectations. Ethan had every reason to resent her, yet he didn't, and somehow that mercy hurt more than hatred. "Why did you really come tonight?" Olivia finally asked. Ethan thought about the answer before speaking. Sophie wanted to see the ocean. Olivia almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "That's it." Ethan smiled slightly. "And maybe part of me wanted to see if you were happy." Olivia's throat tightened unexpectedly. Before she could respond, Nathaniel appeared beside them holding champagne glasses. "There you are," he said to Olivia, though his eyes immediately locked onto Ethan. "Everything okay out here?" "Fine," Olivia answered too quickly. "Yeah." Nathaniel handed her a glass before turning toward Ethan with a polished smile that failed to hide his irritation. "You know," Nathaniel said casually, "I still can't figure you out." Ethan remained calm. "Most people don't need to." Nathaniel laughed softly. "See that right there? That mysterious act?" He leaned closer. "Guys in my world usually brag when they finally make money. You almost seem embarrassed by it." Ethan's expression never changed. "Money impresses insecure people. Safety impresses me." Nathaniel's smile faded slightly. "Safety?" Ethan nodded once toward the ballroom where Sophie stood laughing beside the dessert table. "Everything I built was for her." Olivia followed Ethan's gaze toward Sophie, and suddenly another painful realization settled into her chest. Ethan had never chased power for ego. Everything about him revolved around protecting the people he loved. That was who he had always been, even years ago. She simply failed to understand it because she spent too much time chasing appearances instead of character. Nathaniel glanced toward the bodyguards positioned subtly around the property. "You honestly expect me to believe all this security is necessary?" Ethan answered quietly. "Sometimes attention creates danger." Nathaniel smirked dismissively. "You some kind of secret agent now?" Ethan almost smiled at that. "No." "Then what are you?" For the first time all evening, Ethan's eyes darkened slightly. Not with anger, with memory. A man who learned the hard way what happens when you can't protect the people you care about. Nathaniel looked confused by the answer, but Olivia wasn't. Because suddenly she remembered the final months before Ethan disappeared from her life completely. Strange phone calls. Random bruises Ethan refused to explain. Nights where he barely slept. Constant stress hidden behind forced smiles. At the time, she assumed he was simply failing under financial pressure. But standing beside him now, Olivia began wondering if there had been things happening in Ethan's life she never even noticed. Daddy Sophie suddenly yelled while running toward them carrying 2 cupcakes triumphantly. "I negotiated successfully." Ethan laughed softly. "Did you now?" Sophie handed 1 cupcake to him proudly before noticing Olivia watching them. "Do you want one?" Olivia smiled faintly. "Sure." Sophie immediately split her cupcake in half without hesitation and handed Olivia the larger piece. "Daddy says sharing fixes bad days." Olivia stared at the child for several seconds before accepting it quietly. Ethan watched the interaction with a softness in his eyes Olivia had not seen in years. It used to be the same look he gave her whenever she was stressed or overwhelmed. Protective, patient, loving without needing recognition for it. Olivia suddenly realized something terrifying. She had spent 7 years convincing herself she outgrew Ethan Brooks. But standing beside him tonight felt dangerously similar to standing beside home. And that realization made her engagement ring suddenly feel heavier than ever before. As the evening continued, Olivia found herself distracted constantly by Ethan and Sophie together. The way Ethan instinctively adjusted Sophie's coat when ocean wind grew colder. The way Sophie reached for his hand automatically while walking through crowds. The way Ethan listened to her stories with complete attention despite powerful guests trying repeatedly to speak with him. Nothing about their connection looked performative. It was real. deep, unshakable. Olivia began noticing the contrast everywhere. Nathaniel checked stock updates during conversations. Ethan memorized the exact way Sophie liked strawberries removed from desserts. Nathaniel talked constantly about expanding his empire. Ethan talked about Sophie's piano lessons like they mattered more than global business deals. And worst of all, Olivia realized Ethan seemed genuinely content without needing anyone's approval. She had expected revenge energy from him tonight. Pride, arrogance, some desire to prove he had won. Instead, Ethan behaved like a man who no longer measured his worth through other people's opinions. That calmness slowly became unbearable because Olivia suddenly understood the cruel truth she spent years avoiding. Ethan Brooks had not been weak when she left him. He had simply loved her honestly in a world where honest love often looks powerless beside ambition. By the time the wedding reception reached its final hour, the atmosphere inside the Grand Meridian no longer felt elegant. It felt unstable, like a crystal glass balancing on the edge of a table moments before shattering. The string quartet continued playing near the dance floor. Servers continued carrying champagne beneath glowing chandeliers. And photographers still floated through the ballroom, capturing curated smiles for social media. But underneath the luxury and music, something invisible had shifted. People were no longer talking about the wedding. They were talking about Ethan Brooks. Olivia noticed it everywhere. Investors whispered while glancing toward the back tables. Executives who initially ignored Ethan were now subtly approaching him one by one under the excuse of casual conversation. Even Nathaniel's own business partners kept looking increasingly uncomfortable whenever Ethan's name entered discussion. And the more attention Ethan attracted, the quieter he became. That silence somehow made him feel even more dangerous. Sophie sat beside him eating strawberries from the dessert table, while Ethan listened patiently to her excited explanation about sea otters she had seen during the drive down the California coast. He gave her his full attention despite powerful men waiting nearby hoping for a chance to speak with him. Olivia watched the interaction from across the ballroom with growing confusion because nothing about Ethan's behavior matched the image she created in her mind for years. Wealthy men usually demanded attention. Nathaniel certainly did. But Ethan behaved as though billion-dollar conversations mattered less than hearing his daughter finish a story about ocean animals. That contrast began haunting Olivia more deeply every minute. Near the bar, Nathaniel grabbed one of his investors by the arm. "Tell me exactly what you know about Ethan Brooks," he muttered sharply. The older investor looked uneasy immediately. "Honestly, not much. Nobody knows much. That's the weird part." Nathaniel frowned. "You said he owns some security company." "Not some security company." The man lowered his voice carefully. "Brooks, Strategic International handles private intelligence executive protection, cyber operations, government contracts. People in our circles don't even say the company name casually." Nathaniel stared at him. "You're exaggerating." "Am I?" The investor pulled out his phone quickly and opened a financial article hidden behind subscription access. Nathaniel's expression slowly tightened while reading the screen. Brooks Strategic International, estimated valuation $4.8 billion. Global operations in 12 countries. Confidential federal partnerships. Corporate crisis management division linked to multiple Fortune 500 acquisitions. Nathaniel blinked once. This can't be the same Ethan Brooks. Apparently it is. The investor looked toward Ethan across the ballroom with visible caution. "You invited a ghost into your wedding, Nathaniel. Guys like him don't appear publicly unless they have a reason." Nathaniel immediately looked toward Olivia across the room. For the first time all night, real unease entered his face. Meanwhile, Olivia stood frozen beside the dance floor while old memories replayed endlessly in her mind. Ethan carrying groceries through rain because they couldn't afford a car. Ethan pretending not to be exhausted after 18-hour shifts. Ethan quietly telling her not to worry whenever debt collectors called the apartment. How could that same man become this? The question refused to leave her alone. But an even more terrifying question followed behind it. What exactly happened after she left him? Before Olivia could gather her thoughts, movement near the ballroom entrance suddenly pulled everyone's attention away from the music. Conversations slowed almost instantly, then stopped entirely. A woman had entered the reception surrounded by 2 discreet assistants and 3 security personnel dressed in dark formal suits. She appeared to be in her 50s, silver-haired, elegant, commanding without trying to be. The moment several guests recognized her, expressions around the room visibly changed. "That's Victoria Hale," someone whispered near the bar. "No way. Why is she here?" Victoria Hale was one of the most feared and respected businesswomen in the private security world. Former intelligence consultant, billionaire investor, a woman powerful enough to make senators nervous during negotiations. Nathaniel himself had spent 2 years unsuccessfully trying to schedule a meeting with her foundation regarding one of his international development projects. And now she was walking directly into his wedding unannounced. Nathaniel immediately straightened his tuxedo and stepped forward with a polished smile. "Ms. Hale," he said confidently while approaching her. "What an incredible surprise. I'm Nathaniel Vaughn." Victoria barely glanced at him. "I know who you are." Then she walked past him without stopping. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as Victoria Hale crossed directly toward Ethan Brooks. Ethan rose calmly from his chair while Sophie looked up excitedly. "Miss Victoria," Sophie said happily. Victoria's severe expression softened immediately. "There's my favorite negotiator." Sophie grinned proudly. "Daddy let me have 2 cupcakes." "Scandalous behavior," Victoria replied solemnly before gently squeezing Sophie's shoulder affectionately. Then she looked toward Ethan. "We need to talk." Ethan nodded once. "Anything urgent?" Victoria handed him a thin black folder. "The board wants your final decision tonight." Several nearby executives overheard the sentence and exchanged alarmed looks immediately. Ethan opened the folder briefly, scanning documents without visible emotion. Olivia noticed Nathaniel staring at the papers with growing tension. "What board?" Nathaniel suddenly asked while stepping closer. Victoria finally looked at him directly. "The board acquiring Vaughn Urban Development." Silence hit the ballroom like a physical impact. Nathaniel blinked rapidly. "Excuse me." Victoria's expression remained perfectly calm. "Your investors approved the emergency acquisition proposal this afternoon." Nathaniel laughed nervously. "That's impossible." Ethan closed the folder slowly. "Not impossible," he said quietly. "Just unfortunate timing." Nathaniel's face drained of color. "You're buying my company." "No," Ethan corrected calmly. "I'm deciding whether it's worth saving." Guests began whispering wildly around the ballroom. Olivia stared at Ethan as though seeing him for the first time. Nathaniel stepped closer aggressively. "You planned this," Ethan's voice never rose. "I came here because your fiancé invited me." Nathaniel turned toward Olivia sharply. "What the hell is going on?" Olivia couldn't answer because her mind was already unraveling beneath a much larger realization. Ethan Brooks, the man she once pitied, now possessed the power to erase Nathaniel's empire with a signature. The imbalance of power inside the room had completely reversed, and everyone could feel it happening in real time. Nathaniel suddenly lowered his voice dangerously. "You think this is funny?" Ethan looked genuinely confused. "No. I think it's sad." That answer somehow humiliated Nathaniel more than insults ever could. Across the ballroom, Sophie quietly tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered softly. "People look scared." Ethan knelt slightly beside her chair. Sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable. Olivia felt chills hearing the sentence because suddenly, the entire evening began fitting together differently inside her mind. Ethan never arrived seeking revenge. He never tried humiliating anyone. The chaos happening tonight wasn't coming from Ethan's ego. It was coming from secrets other people were desperately trying to hide. Victoria Hale looked toward Ethan carefully. "There's more," she said quietly. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as she handed him another document from the folder. He read it silently. Then, for the first time that evening, a shadow crossed his face. Olivia noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked before stopping herself. Ethan looked toward Nathaniel slowly. "Federal investigators executed warrants in New York 2 hours ago." Nathaniel froze completely. Victoria continued calmly. "Financial fraud. Offshore laundering. Illegal property seizures." The room exploded into whispers. Nathaniel immediately snapped. "That's bullshit." But nobody around him looked convinced anymore. Victoria folded her hands calmly. "Several members of your executive team already accepted immunity deals." Nathaniel turned toward Ethan again with fury rising visibly in his face. "You did this!" Ethan's expression hardened slightly for the first time all evening. "No, you did." Olivia felt her heartbeat accelerating painfully while staring between the two men. Nathaniel looked cornered now, sweating, breathing harder, no longer the composed billionaire groom controlling the room. And Ethan still stood perfectly calm beside his daughter like a man who already knew storms eventually reveal people's true character. Then Olivia noticed something else. Ethan looked disappointed, not satisfied, not triumphant. Disappointed. As though part of him genuinely wished this night had unfolded differently. Daddy Sophie whispered quietly, sensing the tension around her. Ethan gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart." But before anyone could speak again, the ballroom entrance doors suddenly opened once more. This time, the atmosphere changed completely. 4 men wearing dark FBI jackets entered the reception alongside federal agents in formal suits. Conversations stopped instantly. Cameras lowered. Music died mid-song. One agent scanned the room before walking directly toward Nathaniel Vaughn. Gasps spread through the guests like fire. Olivia's face went white. Nathaniel backed away immediately. "You've got to be kidding me." The lead agent removed a document calmly. "Nathaniel Vaughn, we have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding financial conspiracy, money laundering, and fraudulent acquisition practices." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests immediately began pulling out phones. Some backed away physically from Nathaniel while others rushed toward exits. Olivia stood completely frozen in her wedding dress as her perfect evening collapsed around her in front of hundreds of witnesses. Nathaniel pointed furiously toward Ethan. "This is him. This is retaliation." The FBI agent didn't even look at Ethan. "Sir, we've been investigating your organization for 14 months. Nathaniel turned wildly toward Olivia. "Say something." But Olivia couldn't move because at that exact moment, another horrifying realization struck her. Ethan knew. Not just tonight. For years, Ethan had known dangerous people existed around Nathaniel long before this wedding ever happened. Suddenly, memories returned with brutal clarity. 7 years ago, shortly before Ethan disappeared from her life, he began acting strangely, taking mysterious calls outside their apartment, coming home bruised sometimes, warning her subtly to stay away from certain investors during networking events. Olivia always assumed he was paranoid because they were struggling financially. But now her stomach dropped as a terrifying possibility formed inside her mind. Ethan had been trying to protect her. Ethan slowly looked toward Olivia, while federal agents handcuffed Nathaniel nearby. The ballroom around them dissolved into panic and noise, but somehow Olivia only heard her own heartbeat. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered shakily. Ethan stayed silent for several seconds, then finally nodded once. Olivia felt tears rising immediately. All those years ago. Ethan looked away briefly toward the ocean beyond the ballroom windows. "I found out Nathaniel's investors were connected to illegal acquisitions and political laundering operations." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan's voice remained painfully calm. "Because you were already being watched." Olivia's breath caught. Ethan continued quietly. The moment you started interning at Vaughn Legal Group, your name became attached to people I didn't trust. The room around Olivia suddenly felt distant and unreal. So, you left me. Ethan finally looked directly into her eyes again, and this time the sadness there nearly destroyed her. I disappeared because staying near you would have put you in danger. Olivia's knees almost weakened beneath her wedding gown. 7 years. 7 years believing Ethan abandoned her because he failed. 7 years resenting him while he silently carried secrets that could have destroyed both their lives. Nearby, Nathaniel struggled furiously against federal agents while guests recorded everything on their phones. The perfect luxury wedding had transformed into public catastrophe within minutes. But Olivia barely noticed anymore because the only thing she could see was Ethan Brooks standing calmly in the middle of the destruction she once believed he deserved. Except Ethan never came to destroy her life. He came carrying the unbearable truth that he had once sacrificed his own future to save hers. The wedding disappeared from headlines within a week, but the humiliation did not. Videos of FBI agents escorting Nathaniel Vaughn out of the Grand Meridian in handcuffs spread across every major media platform in the country. News anchors dissected his fraudulent empire for days, while investors fled lawsuits exploded and former business partners publicly denied ever trusting him. But the clip that people replayed most wasn't Nathaniel's arrest. It was Olivia Carter standing motionless in her wedding dress, while Ethan Brooks watched the chaos unfold beside his daughter with quiet, unreadable eyes. Social media turned her into a symbol overnight. Some mocked her. Some pitied her. Some envied the man she once abandoned without realizing his true worth. Olivia stopped reading everything after the 3rd day. She left California before sunrise and disappeared into a quiet apartment in Boston, owned by an old college friend. For the first time in years, there were no photographers, no luxury dinners, no business galas, no carefully curated image to maintain. Only silence. And in that silence, the truth finally became impossible to avoid. Ethan never betrayed her. Ethan never abandoned her because he failed. He disappeared because he was protecting her from a world she never even knew existed. The realization haunted Olivia every night. She remembered all the moments she misunderstood him, the bruises he refused to explain, the exhaustion hidden behind forced smiles, the way he constantly checked over his shoulder near the end of their relationship. She used to think he was weak because he struggled financially. Now she understood he had been carrying fear completely alone while trying to keep her safe. And somehow the worst part was knowing Ethan never once used that truth to make her feel guilty. Even at the wedding, he never tried humiliating her, never exposed her ignorance, never demanded apologies. He simply stood there and let the truth reveal itself naturally. That mercy hurt more than revenge ever could. 2 months later, on a gray autumn afternoon in Seattle, Olivia finally gathered the courage to visit Ethan. She almost turned around 3 separate times before reaching the small lakeside cafe where Sophie's piano recital was being held. Through the cafe windows, she spotted Ethan immediately. He sat near the front row beside Sophie's piano teacher, still calm, still quiet, still carrying that same grounded presence that somehow made every room feel smaller around him. Sophie noticed Olivia first. Her eyes widened with surprise before she immediately smiled and waved enthusiastically through the glass. Ethan turned slowly at the movement. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Olivia suddenly felt nervous in a way expensive boardrooms and powerful men had never made her feel before. Ethan stood as she approached the table. "Hi," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "Hi, Olivia." There was no anger in his voice. That somehow made this harder. Sophie rushed over excitedly. "You came?" Olivia smiled faintly. "I hope that's okay. Daddy said maybe you would." Olivia glanced at Ethan in surprise. Ethan looked down briefly before answering quietly. "Sophie wanted to send you an invitation." Sophie grabbed Olivia's hand immediately. "I'm playing 2 songs today." "That's impressive. I practiced for like a million years. Ethan almost smiled. Olivia noticed how different he looked outside the chaos of wealth and headlines. Simpler, human, not the untouchable figure from the wedding, just Ethan. The man she once loved before pride, fear, and ambition convinced her she needed more. After the recital ended, Sophie ran outside toward the lake with friends while Ethan and Olivia remained near the cafe patio beneath soft afternoon rain. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Olivia finally whispered, "I'm sorry." Ethan stayed quiet. Olivia swallowed hard. "Not because you became successful. Not because Nathaniel was exposed. I'm sorry because I stopped seeing who you really were long before I left." Ethan looked out toward the lake calmly. "You were young." "No," Olivia said painfully. "I was selfish." Ethan didn't argue. That honesty somehow made the moment feel heavier. Olivia looked at him carefully. "Why didn't you ever hate me?" Ethan let out a faint breath through his nose before answering. "Because loving someone deeply doesn't disappear just because they hurt you." Olivia felt tears immediately burn her eyes. Ethan continued quietly. "For a long time I kept thinking maybe if life had been easier back then, maybe things would have ended differently." Olivia looked down at her trembling hands. "Did you ever stop loving me?" Ethan was silent for several seconds, long enough that the truth already existed before he spoke it aloud. "No," he admitted softly. "But loving someone and returning to the past aren't always the same thing." The sentence broke something gently inside her. Because for the first time, Olivia understood the real consequence of losing someone good. Not dramatic revenge, not hatred, just the quiet realization that some people love you honestly once and never belong to you again after you let them go. Sophie suddenly ran back toward them holding a paper drawing. "Daddy!" she shouted happily. "Look!" Ethan knelt immediately beside her while she showed him a messy sketch of the three of them standing beside the ocean. Olivia noticed something strange in the drawing. All three figures were holding hands. Sophie looked between them innocently. "I made this because sad people should still be friends." Ethan laughed softly under his breath while Olivia wiped tears from her face quickly. Sophie tilted her head. "Did I say something wrong?" Olivia shook her head immediately. "No, sweetheart." Ethan gently took the drawing from Sophie and folded it carefully. "I think it's beautiful." Sophie smiled proudly before running back toward the playground area again. Silence returned between the adults, but this time it felt lighter, softer, not healed completely, but honest. Olivia looked at Ethan one final time. "Do you think people can forgive each other without getting the old life back?" Ethan watched Sophie laughing near the lake as rain drifted softly across the water. Then he answered quietly, "I think sometimes forgiveness is accepting that love existed, even if life moved in another direction." Olivia nodded slowly, tears slipping silently down her face. Ethan gently placed Sophie's drawing into his coat pocket before looking toward the fading gray horizon. And for the first time in many years, neither of them felt trapped by the past anymore.